Derek Goodwin claims his property was dumped on the curb when his landlord mistakenly evicted him. Julia Hadley says the eviction was an error, but Mr. Goodwin wasn't on the lease, so she's not responsible for his stuff.
Good day. I see I've got Derek Goodwin here as my plaintiff, Julia Hadley as my defendant. Mr. Goodwin, you are suing Ms. Hadley here for $20,000. You're saying that this was a landlord of yours at some time and that she evicted you erroneously. Tell me a little bit more about why you're suing her today.
Yeah, as you said, Your Honor, I was mistakenly evicted. They meant to be evicting the unit next door. We were fully paid up on rent. We had actually never missed a rent payment. And we came home, my daughter and I, to find that many of our belongings were strewn out on the curb. Some of them had been thrown in the dumpster. When we went into the unit, all of our stuff was gone. In particular, a TV that I had recently purchased and a sectional. That's the bulk of the financial damages, but also some of my daughter's toys and belongings, like her teddy bear, which was beloved to her, we found ripped in half on the street, which was obviously quite traumatic for her. She's only 5 years old. When I gave the defendant the opportunity to reimburse us for the damages, she made no effort to deal in good faith. She told me, submit this rental application, and I did, and then she was like, well, you've actually been denied, so there's nothing I can do. And at no point before we got here did she really make any effort to help us as we move into a new place, and we're trying to furnish it with stuff up to the level of what we had before.
So you're telling me, Mr. Goodwin, you and your daughter lived in this unit for how long?
Well, originally it was my then girlfriend and daughter's place, and they moved in 2020, and then after about 6 months, I moved in with them, and we were making a go of it.
Yep.
And then when we broke up and my ex wanted to move out, my daughter was already in school and we didn't want to uproot her, so I stayed on and we lived there for another year.
Okay.
Again, I was making all the rent payments. They were in my name, and we never had any issues. And then we came home one day to just find all of our belongings had been, taken out of our place and thrown on the ground or stuffed into a trash. And some of them we don't even know what happened to. Like the TV, it's not clear where it went.
All right, sir. What do you have to show some evidence around some of this to the court? Do you have receipts? Do you have pictures of your goods? Do you have checks that you paid rent with? What do you have, sir? Give everything you have to my bailiff, please, sir.
Okay.
Just give
just an entire folder?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Because this is, that's a lot of claim there. Let me try to take a look, see if I can figure out what's going on here. Thank you, sir. Okay, I do see a standard lease agreement. This is the girlfriend I see, Anna Smith?
Yeah.
Okay, so she is named in the lease, and only she is named in the lease. You do know that, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I do see the landlord, Ms. Hadley, here as the landlord. Let's see abandonment. Tenant vacates or abandons, but you're saying, so you never moved out?
No.
Okay, let's take a look at this, because you would be considered a guest, I suppose, since you were not on the lease. There should be no other persons living in the premises other than the tenants, and any occupants are allowed for periods not lasting more than 14 days unless otherwise approved by the landlord. So we'll get to that in a second. Now, it looks like the rent was $2,500 a month, sir, that you were paying?
Yes, but if you look at the lease, it has a mistake there and says the wrong number.
Okay, yes, because I see the lease has $1,500 a month?
Yeah, but you can see my bank statement. I was paying $2,500 a month.
So how did you know you were supposed to be paying $2,500?
Everything was verbally communicated to me by my girlfriend.
By the girlfriend.
That's why I was never added to the lease, because I didn't see it until much later. But I started paying the $2,500 a month, and we didn't get any communication that we were paying, too much. So I had no reason to think it was wrong.
Okay, so this is a home furnishing estimate, sir, that you're offering the court? You're saying this is the equivalency of the valuation of everything that you lost?
Yes.
Okay, I see a lot here. I see luxury bedroom, bathroom, home office, master bedroom, guest bedroom, all this stuff. This is really saying that this could be up to $20,000. That's where you're getting this from, sir?
Yeah, and then there's also a receipt in there for the purchase of some of the items that were damaged, just so you know that, why the price tag is what it is.
I do see that. Okay, I also see, sir, that you were given a letter of denial once you actually did apply for the apartment lease. It says low credit.
Yes, my credit score was a few points below what they required. I was only applying because she said that was what was necessary in order to process reimbursing me. We had already decided by that point we didn't want to live in a place where we might mistakenly be evicted.
Coming up on Equal Justice.
How can I take his word for that? I don't know that he was actually living there. I don't know if that's actually his stuff. Just because you were paying the rent, that doesn't mean that you weren't staying there. You could just be paying your girlfriend's rent.
Equal Justice is back with a case of Derek Goodwin, who blames Julia Hadley for wrongfully throwing out his property.
Okay, this sounds like a real mess, Miss Hadley. Tell me why you evicted this man and all of his things.
Your Honor, I never evicted him. If he's not on a lease, he cannot be evicted. How is that possible? My property management team did make a mistake once they removed all of his belongings out of that unit. But once we found out that there was the wrong unit, we did go and try to regain as many items as we could, and most of the stuff had already been taken. So I'm not responsible for it because he was never on that lease.
So you were trying to evict a different unit. That's correct.
In July of 2022, I had to execute a eviction notice on another unit right adjacent or next door to him.
And so you had gone through the proper court filings for that unit.
Correct. So my property team was executing that order.
Okay, but that was for the wrong unit, not this man's unit.
Correct.
Okay, did you subsequently execute that correct unit?
Yes, ma'am. We did evict that tenant.
Okay, so you put this man's belongings out, as you say, his daughter, teddy bear, all that stuff?
Unfortunately, Your Honor, we did make that mistake, but
Right.
I tried to correct my mistake and help assist him in giving him 48 hours to fill out an application. I didn't charge him any type of application fee, but you know,
No,
his
but the
credit score was
things, I understand that he didn't get a new apartment lease. I'm not concerned about that, to be quite frank, ma'am. What I'm concerned about are the things that he is saying that he lost. So, sir, let me ask you this. Were you able to recoup any of the items?
No, everything was either gone or had been damaged past the point
So
of
we
use.
did recover some items, and we did give those things to you.
She's talking about a handful of small items. I'm talking about the big ticket things like a couch.
Okay, so I see the TV was $2,500, and I see the dark gray sofa. You also paid $2,500, and then the rent. So let's talk about this discrepancy in the rent, Madam Hadley. So he's saying that he was paying $2,500. Were you receiving $2,500 a month for the rent on this unit?
I was receiving $25. At the end of her lease, she did go to a month-to-month, which causes the lease
To go up.
The increase.
Okay, so as I expected, sir, that wasn't you overpaying. It sounds like
Sure.
between the girlfriend and the landlord, they had a rent adjustment that you just weren't made aware of.
Your Honor,
And Your
I'm
Honor,
just
if I could
pointing
add-
out.
Wait a minute, Ms. Hadley. Go ahead, sir.
I'm just pointing out that her whole argument rests on a paperwork issue, saying that I didn't have my paperwork in a proper manner, and I'm pointing out that her lease is riddled with errors about the rent. It also says the governing laws of the agreement are Alabama, and as we all know, this took place in Texas. So I think it's hypocritical for her to say, well, you didn't have your name on this piece of paper, so I'm not going to make any good faith effort to reimburse you for my own people's mistake, which she admits readily, and say that she doesn't owe me anything because we didn't take care of this
Okay,
one.
I
Your
hear
Honor,
you.
even though he was paying the $2,500, that doesn't tell me that he was staying. He could have just been paying his girlfriend's rent. How can I take his word for that? I don't know that he was actually living there. I don't know if that's actually his stuff. Just because you were paying the rent, that doesn't mean that you weren't staying there. You could just be paying your girlfriend's rent.
You
It doesn't
knew
mean
that,
that
you
you
knew
were
that
staying there.
you knew that my daughter was living there, though.
Ms. Hadley, let me ask you this. What do you say about the plaintiff's argument that your document is less than perfect, so there should be some wiggle room here?
That document was drafted by my team. I wasn't aware that there were some mistakes in that, but there's still, Mr. Goodwin, it's his responsibility to come in and say, hey, I need to add my name to the list, especially if he's been living there a year. Wouldn't you think something would go wrong? How would I get in touch with you if there was a fire or something like that?
Well, let's talk about some things that could go wrong, Ms. Hadley. I'm glad you brought that up because he was living there, he says, for over a year with his daughter, and it sounds like the daughter was the consistent human that was occupying the space. She was in possession of her room for over 2 years.
Yes.
That's correct, right? Okay, Ms. Hadley, rather, you did know the child was there since the inception of their lease, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So how often were you or your team, because we keep hearing about your team, checking on this unit, making sure it was in good condition, making sure that everything was, on the up and up in terms of the unit? Because that is something that landlords tend to do throughout a year-long period, correct?
Correct, Your Honor. We only go in if something is needed to be updated. If they call and ask for, have some repairs that need to be done,
Right.
then we'll do that. But as far as inspections or anything like that, we don't just go into their apartments without letting them know that we're going in.
So what you're telling the court, Ms. Hadley, is that for at least one calendar year, you nor your team stepped foot into this particular unit, and thus you really didn't know who was occupying the space.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have any evidence for the court, ma'am? Do you have any lease or anything?
I only have the lease that he gave you. I think I have the same documents that he has.
Okay. Why don't you just offer that to the court? Let me make sure those documents match. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Okay, yep, I see the same denial of him for an extended lease because of the low credit score, so you did
I tried
run
to
that.
remedy the situation and help him to assist him
Well-
to live in the same area so his daughter continue going to the same school.
Okay, so but what you're saying at this point is he was originally erroneously evicted because it was the wrong unit, but at this point, he's actually evicted, right? Because you're saying that he's no longer permitted to be there.
Well, how can I evict someone who's not on a lease?
Coming up on Equal Justice.
You don't feel like you owe the plaintiff a dime because he wasn't on the lease. Is that your argument?
That is my argument on it. I did not know that he had even moved into the residence.
This is Equal Justice. Equal Justice is back with a case of Derek Goodwin, who blames Julia Hadley for wrongfully throwing out his property.
Sir, where are you living right now? Let me get it
I've
from
moved
you.
into a new apartment.
Okay, so you have a new apartment. You have a lease this time.
Yes, I have a lease.
Your name is on it.
My name is on it.
Okay,
Yes.
and you're paying your rent and everything's good.
Paying my rent, everything's good. I did have to furnish it with secondhand stuff from online because of the financial difficulties, which is part of why I'm seeking this.
Okay. And you're telling me, Ms. Hadley, that you don't feel like you owe the plaintiff a dime because he wasn't on the lease. Is that your argument?
That is my argument on it. I did not know that he had even moved into the residence.
Okay. I actually, believe it or not, think I've heard enough between the two of you to make my ruling. And, these landlord-tenant cases tend to be more complicated than people realize. And the reason is because people like to play armchair lawyer and feel like they understand the law in this space in a way that they don't. So oftentimes we hear things like, you're not on the lease, so you have no rights. And the reality is that's just not true in this nation. There's been a lot of revision to landlord-tenant law to make sure that people that are in possession of property, have rights. Even when they don't pay their rent, even when they have had legal action taken against them. And sometimes, ma'am, even if they are not indeed on the lease, which is why before you could remove the items from the property that you legally did evict properly, you had to have that declaration from the court saying that that person had been legally evicted. Because had you touched even that person's things before that legal process took place, we'd be in court for that person's items as well.
Coming up on Equal Justice.
He was staying for a year. He's no longer a guest,
So how
ma'am.
am I supposed to know that he's staying there
Well,
for
that's
a
the
year?
thing, Ms. Hadley. And I'm giving my ruling. This is not a time for Q&A.
This is Equal Justice. Equal Justice is back with a case of Derek Goodwin, who blames Julia Hadley for wrongfully throwing out his property.
Having your name on a lease is a very good thing. It goes by way of affirming legal possession in a very formalized way. But people can be in possession, ma'am, and people often are in possession of property and spaces absent a lease. People do it every day. Now, I want to talk about this guest clause. Because you rely heavily on it. You're saying that I don't have any obligation to this man, Your Honor, because he was a guest, he extended the 14 days, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's it exactly, Ms. Hadley. Once he was staying for a year, he's no longer a guest,
So
ma'am.
how am I supposed to know that he's staying there for a year?
Well, that's the thing, Ms. Hadley. And I'm giving my ruling. This is not a time for Q&A. The issue is, You are supposed to know more than anybody. So the fact that he actually was paying you $2,500 a month, you're getting off pretty good. Okay, and you were cashing those rent checks. So you were getting paid, your property was being occupied by somebody other than the actual leasee, but the court is not going to penalize this man for that. He had possession, and there was a consistent possessor of the property throughout the lease term, which was the daughter, the minor child. And then you said what really controls here, ma'am, which is that you and your team made the biggest mistake of all, which is throwing out the wrong unit's item, okay? Your effort to remedy failed. Your effort to remedy, as this man told the court under sworn testimony, and even you admitted under your testimony, was a few items here and there, because ultimately when you went to confiscate the erroneously tossed items, most of them were gone. Which nice stuff is gone. You sit it on the curb for 5 seconds, it's gonna be gone.
Judge Eboni's verdict when Equal Justice returns. This is Equal Justice.
Now, here's where it's not so good for you, Mr. Goodwin. You've asked the court to give you $20,000, which is a roundabout estimate for the cost of replenishing your entire apartment, because you were telling me that everything was thrown out. And I believe you. But the problem is you're not offering any evidence to everything. You're offering evidence for 2 items that I can physically see and really attest to their valuation. That's the only evidence I have in front of me, so this is the only thing I can rule on, sir. Mr. Goodwin, the court gives you its apologies. Being kicked out and evicted, especially after you've paid the rent, name on the lease, ma'am, or not, you were in legal possession. This court finds you were in legal physical possession. Possession is 9/10 of the law, ma'am. It is more controlling than 4 corners on a document. He was there, he paid your rent, he was a good tenant, but for y'all's mistake, you wouldn't even know he was there today. He'd still be there paying you $2,500 a month, and you'd still be accepting it. So this court is not persuaded. I rule in favor of the plaintiff, but only serve for $5,000. That is all the offering of proof you gave to this court. That is my ruling.
All rise.
Judge Eboni has ruled in favor of the plaintiff. The defendant is ordered to pay $5,000.
The courtroom of Judge Eboni K. Rose was a space defined by more than just the polished mahogany and the stern gaze of the woman behind the bench. It was a crucible of human experience, a place where the abstract principles of justice met the messy, unpredictable reality of daily life. Judge Rose, with her sharp wit honed on the streets of New York, the cool composure of the West Coast, and the deep, soulful grounding of Louisiana and North Carolina, viewed the law as a living, breathing entity. To her, the nameplate on her desk was not merely an identifier, it was a promise. Equal justice, she often reminded those who stood before her, was not about rigid adherence to paper trails at the expense of human dignity. It was about freedom, integrity, and the courage to see the truth through the fog of conflict. On this particular morning, the air in the courtroom felt heavy with the weight of a domestic crisis that had spilled over into the public sphere. Derek Goodwin stood as the plaintiff, a man whose quiet demeanor could not mask the profound sense of violation he carried. Across from him sat Julia Hadley, a property manager whose professional veneer of efficiency struggled to conceal the discomfort of a significant operational failure. Judge Rose adjusted her robes, her eyes sweeping over the room. She was looking for the truth, not just the technicalities. She peered at the plaintiff. Mr. Goodwin, you're suing Miss Hadley for the sum of $20,000. You claim that you were evicted erroneously from your home and that your property was discarded by the landlord. Tell me everything, and do not leave a single detail behind. The courtroom remained silent, save for the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. Judge Rose leaned forward. And how long had you been living in this unit, Mr. Goodwin? It was originally my girlfriend and daughter, who moved in during the year 2020, the plaintiff explained. About 6 months later, I joined them. We were building a life. When the relationship ended, my ex wanted to move out, but my daughter was settled in her school. We did not want to uproot her. I stayed on. I made every rent payment in my name. We had no issues. We were good neighbors. And then, we came home to find our life in the trash. Judge Rose turned her attention to the defendant. Miss Hadley, you have heard the testimony. How do you respond to the claim that you evicted a man and his child who were current on their rent? Your Honor, Julia Hadley replied, her tone defensive. I never evicted him. He was not on the lease, so he could not be evicted in the legal sense. My property management team did make a mistake and removed the belongings from that unit, yes. We were attempting to execute an eviction on the unit next door. Once we realized the error, we tried to recover the items, but most of them were already gone. I do not believe I am responsible for his property, because he was never a named tenant on the lease agreement. The judge narrowed her eyes. You admit, then, that your team entered the wrong unit and discarded the contents? It was a mistake, Your Honor. I tried to correct it. I gave him 48 hours to fill out an application for the unit. I waived the application fee, but his credit score was too low, and he was denied. I have done what I can to remedy the situation. Judge Rose looked at the stack of documents before her. She saw the standard lease agreement, bearing only the name of the girlfriend, Anna Smith. She saw the discrepancies in the rent amounts, $2,500 versus the $1,500 listed on the paper. She saw the evidence of the financial loss, the lists of furniture and electronics, and the heart-wrenching reality of a father trying to rebuild a home for his daughter from the ashes of a bureaucratic failure. She looked at the two of them, the man who had been a ghost in the system, paying rent in the shadows, and the landlord who had seen only a unit number rather than a human life. You know, she began, her voice resonating through the chamber. People love to play at being lawyers. They hide behind clauses and fine print, thinking that if a name is not on a piece of paper, then that person has no rights. But this is not how the law functions in this nation. When you are in possession of a property, you have rights. You cannot simply discard the belongings of a person who has made a home, regardless of whether you have acknowledged their existence on a contract. She turned to Miss Hadley. You mentioned the guest clause. You say he was a guest. A person who stays for 1 year is not a guest. And you were collecting $2,500 in rent every month. You were happy to accept the money, were you not? You were happy to have a tenant who paid on time, even if you did not bother to know who was behind the door. You and your team made the most fundamental mistake a landlord can make. You failed to know who lived in your buildings. The judge shifted in her seat, her gaze softening slightly as she looked at the plaintiff. Mr. Goodwin, you have asked for $20,000. You have provided a detailed list of what you lost. I believe you. However, the law requires proof of damages. I have evidence for the television and the sofa, and I have your testimony. But I cannot award the full amount without the receipts to substantiate every single item. She picked up her gavel, her expression resolute. This court finds that Derek Goodwin was in legal possession of that unit. He was a good tenant who paid his rent. Because of the negligence of your team, Miss Hadley, he and his daughter were forced into a position of great distress. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and you ignored that reality. I rule in favor of the plaintiff. I am awarding $5,000 for the damages, which is the amount supported by the evidence provided to this court. As the proceedings drew to a close, the tension in the room remained, a testament to the complexities of the lives that had crossed paths. Judge Rose watched as they stood, each carrying the weight of the day's verdict. She knew that while the money would help, it could not restore the lost sense of security or the simple comfort of a daughter's teddy bear. But in this courtroom, under her watch, there had been an attempt to balance the scales. As the court rose, the judge allowed herself a momentary reflection on the nature of her work, a constant effort to ensure that behind every nameplate and every legal brief, the humanity of the individual was never forgotten. The path of justice was long and winding, but as long as she sat on that bench, it would be a path walked with integrity and a deep, abiding respect for the truth. The courtroom emptied, leaving the judge alone with the echoes of the testimony, already preparing her mind for the next story, the next struggle, and the next opportunity to serve the cause of equal justice for all. The courtroom was filled with a quiet, heavy atmosphere of anticipation as Judge Eboni K. Rose took her seat. She carried herself with the composed authority of a woman who had seen the world from the vibrant streets of New Orleans, the cool, collected vibe of the West Coast, and the sharp, uncompromising edge of New York. As she looked out over the gallery, her gaze was steady and unwavering. To her, The nameplate on her desk was not merely a piece of metal, it was a testament to the principles she held dear. Equal justice was the cornerstone of the country, built upon the bedrock of freedom and integrity. Those were the values she pursued every single day, whether she was dealing with black, white, purple, gay, straight, or queer individuals from all sectors of life. Her mission was to be a voice for the voiceless, and today, that mission brought her face to face with a complex dispute between two individuals, Derek Goodwin and Julia Hadley. Derek Goodwin, the plaintiff, stood before the bench with a posture that spoke of exhaustion and frustration. He was a man who felt wronged, standing there to seek justice for a situation he described as an erroneous eviction. On the other side stood Julia Hadley, the defendant and landlord, who maintained a calm, detached demeanor. Derek explained to the court that he was seeking $20,000 in damages. He claimed that he and his daughter had been living in a unit that was mistakenly targeted during an eviction process meant for the apartment next door. Derek emphasized that they had never missed a rent payment, and yet, upon returning home one day, he and his daughter were met with the devastating sight of their personal belongings strewn across the curb, some even discarded in a dumpster. He described the emotional toll this took on his 5-year-old daughter, whose beloved teddy bear was found ripped in half on the street. He told the court that when he approached the landlord for reimbursement, he was met with nothing but stalling tactics, including a rental application that was ultimately denied. Judge Rose listened intently as Derek provided documentation, including a standard lease agreement. It was quickly noted that the lease was signed solely by his former girlfriend, Anna Smith. Derek admitted that his name was not on the official document, but he insisted that he had been the one paying the rent of $2,500 per month. He explained that although the lease listed $1,500, the actual amount had been communicated verbally by his girlfriend. He had simply been paying what was required, unaware of any clerical errors within the contract. He presented a home furnishing estimate, arguing that the $20,000 he sought was a fair valuation for the items he had lost, including a recently purchased television and a sectional sofa. Julia Hadley, when given the floor, argued that she could not be held responsible for an eviction that she technically never executed against Derek because he was not a tenant on her lease. She explained that her property management team had indeed made a grievous error by targeting the wrong unit in July of 2022. She claimed that she had attempted to rectify the mistake by offering Derek a chance to apply for a lease, but his low credit score had resulted in a denial. She maintained her position that, because he was not a named tenant, she owed him nothing. The judge probed further, asking why the property management team had not been aware of who was actually occupying the unit. Julia admitted that her team only entered the premises for requested repairs, not for regular inspections. Judge Rose pointed out the irony of the situation, noting that for over a year, the landlord had been happily accepting $2,500 in rent payments without ever confirming the identity of the occupants. The judge underscored that regardless of the written lease, the reality was that Derek had been in physical possession of the property for a significant duration, and that possession held legal weight. The atmosphere in the room shifted as Judge Rose prepared to deliver her ruling. She addressed the courtroom, explaining that many people fell into the trap of acting like armchair lawyers, assuming that because a name was not on a piece of paper, the person had no rights. She clarified that modern landlord and tenant law was designed to protect those who were in actual, consistent possession of a property, even if they were not the primary leaseholders. She pointed out that Julia Hadley had been content to receive the rent money, effectively validating the occupancy, and that the mistake of throwing out the wrong unit was the defining point of a case. While she acknowledged the frustration of the plaintiff, she also noted that the court could only grant damages for what could be proven with evidence. She found that while Derek had provided evidence for a few key items, the claim of $20,000 remained largely unsubstantiated. Judge Rose ruled in favor of the plaintiff, but limited the judgment to $5,000, representing the verifiable value of the items presented to the court. As the bailiff called for the room to rise, the tension between the two parties remained palpable. Derek remarked that he was fortunate to have had at least that amount in receipts, while Julia stood firm in her belief that she had not owed him anything at all. As they walked out of the courtroom, each had had their day in court, and the gavel had fallen, bringing a definitive end to their dispute under the watchful eye of the judge who insisted on nothing less than equal justice. The courtroom was thick with the weight of expectation. Judge Eboni K. Rose sat tall, her presence commanding the room with a unique blend of Southern grace and metropolitan sharpness. She adjusted her robe, her gaze sweeping over the plaintiffs and defendants who stood before her. She was a woman who believed in the letter of the law but never lost sight of the human heart that beat behind every legal disagreement. Her history, from the landscapes of North Carolina and Louisiana to the vibrant energy of the West Coast and the relentless pace of New York, had forged her into a jurist who understood the complexities of life. The case before her was centered on a dispute between Derek Goodwin and Julia Hadley. Mr. Goodwin, a man who had clearly weathered a storm of personal stress, stood before the bench with a look of quiet determination. Ms. Hadley, the landlord in question, projected an air of professional detachment that seemed to grate against the reality of the situation. The air in the room was still, save for the hum of the air conditioning, as Judge Rose began the proceedings with a voice that was firm, clear, and undeniably authoritative. Judge Rose looked at the nameplate on her desk, then back at the room. She spoke of equality, freedom, and integrity, emphasizing that her courtroom was a space where the truth was the only currency that held value. She acknowledged the diversity of those who came before her, declaring that justice was a universal necessity, regardless of background. Mr. Goodwin stepped forward to lay out his grievance. He described the day he returned home with his 5-year-old daughter to find their lives scattered across the curb. The scene he painted was heart-wrenching. He explained how he and his daughter had lived in the unit for a significant period after his relationship with the primary leaseholder had ended. He spoke of the rent payments he had made consistently, payments that had gone to Ms. Hadley without complaint until the day of the erroneous eviction. The loss of personal items, specifically the beloved teddy bear of his young daughter and a recently purchased television, brought a somber tone to the proceedings. He made it clear that while the financial damage was substantial, the emotional toll on a young child was the true tragedy. Ms. Hadley stood as the defendant, presenting a defense that relied heavily on the technicalities of a lease agreement. She argued that since Mr. Goodwin was not a named tenant on the lease, he had no standing to be evicted in the traditional sense, and thus, she claimed, she was not responsible for the destruction or loss of his property. She explained that a mistake had been made by her property management team, who had intended to evict the unit next door. She admitted to the error, but maintained that her legal obligation was limited by the document she held in her hand. Judge Rose listened with careful attention, peeling back the layers of the argument. She questioned Ms. Hadley on her knowledge of the occupants. It was revealed that the property management had failed to conduct basic inspections or maintain active communication with the residents for over 1 year. The judge pointedly asked how a landlord could justify not knowing who was occupying their property for such an extensive duration. The dialogue between the bench and the litigants grew intense. Mr. Goodwin argued that the lease itself was riddled with inconsistencies, including incorrect rental figures and a choice of law clause that referenced the wrong state. He contended that if Ms. Hadley was willing to ignore these errors to accept his rent payments, she could not suddenly cite the document as an impenetrable shield against accountability. Judge Rose deliberated, her mind weighing the rigid structure of contract law against the fluid reality of residential possession. She explained to the court that while a name on a lease is a formal affirmation of possession, it is not the only way to establish legal rights. Possession, she noted, is a significant component of the law. She reminded those present that even in the absence of a lease, a person in physical possession of a property has rights that cannot be ignored by impulsive or erroneous actions by a landlord. She turned her attention to the defendant, addressing the guest clause that Ms. Hadley had used as a justification. The judge made it clear that after a year of continuous residence, the status of a guest had long since expired. The landlord had accepted the payments, the property had been occupied, and the legal responsibilities of the landlord could not be discarded simply because of an oversight in paperwork. The climax of the ruling approached. Judge Rose acknowledged the emotional testimony regarding the lost items and the difficulty Mr. Goodwin faced in rebuilding his home. However, she also held Mr. Goodwin to the standard of evidence. She reminded him that while his story was compelling, the court could only grant compensation based on what could be proven with documentation. She pointed to the receipts and valuations for the major items that could be verified. With a final, decisive tone, Judge Rose ruled in favor of the plaintiff. She recognized that the eviction was a mistake that should never have occurred and that Mr. Goodwin was in legal, physical possession of the unit. She awarded $5,000 to Mr. Goodwin, noting that this sum was the limit of what could be substantiated by the evidence presented. She offered a final, stern reminder to Ms. Hadley about the importance of professional oversight and the danger of assuming that technicalities override the basic rights of individuals living in a home. As the court rose, the tension in the room began to dissipate, replaced by the lingering echoes of the judge's closing remarks. The case had served as a stark lesson in the necessity of transparency, accountability, and the human element in legal matters. Mr. Goodwin took a breath of relief, acknowledging that while the money could not replace everything, it was a step toward rectifying the wrong. Ms. Hadley remained stoic, though the weight of the judgment was visible. Judge Rose, having delivered her verdict, walked out of the courtroom with the grace that had defined her entrance. The session was closed, but the principles of fairness and integrity that she championed remained in the room long after the doors had shut. It was a reminder to all that in the pursuit of justice, one must always look beyond the paper and into the truth of the situation. The world outside the courtroom continued its rhythm, but for those involved, the day had been a transformative experience, highlighting the delicate balance between the letter of the law and the lives of those it was meant to protect. They walked away into the afternoon, the city life swirling around them, each carrying the lesson of the day forward into their own futures. Justice, as Judge Rose had stated, was not just about the rules, but about the values that held a society together, and today, those values had been upheld in the pursuit of truth and fair treatment for all involved.